First of all, thank you all for sticking with us and joining us. I know it's been a productive, long week full of meetings, sessions, but I'm glad you're all here for this one because this is one that we've looked forward to since a few weeks ago when we not only put it together, we've had a long-standing relationship with their team, and I'm very excited to not only have them here, but to have their big news that they announced be a huge part of this session and what we're going to talk about with respect to the Caresyntax story. And also I found out something about Dr. Ramshaw today. It is actually the one-year anniversary of his exit from his previous company as a CEO. So we'll get some cool insights from that journey as well as the Caresyntax journey that he's been a part of. First, to introduce our speakers, David Cubbin of Care Capital Advisors and Dr. Bruce Ramshaw of Caresyntax. David, I'll pass it over to you to introduce yourself first.
Certainly. Thanks very much. And it's a pleasure to be here. And I'd like to start by thanking all of you in the audience for being here for the graveyard shift. I know that it's not just our session, but also possibly the drinks afterwards that have brought you here. But
that's our strategy.
Yeah, that's the strategy. But thanks very much for being here. So my name's David Cubbin, Australian by birth, based in London, and I run a firm that invests into health tech opportunities. As it pertains to Caresyntax, I'm a believer in the business. I'm an investor into Caresyntax, both over the last couple of years when I first invested, but also continuing to invest and bring my cohort of sort of family offices and other investors in to the current rounds. So very excited to be here with Bruce and the Caresyntax team.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. And Bruce, over to you. And I'd love, as part of your background, to tell us what got you into medicine to begin with and a little bit about that journey.
Sure. And thanks for having us. Thanks for being here in the audience. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life as I went into college. I did have a good mom who taught me, do something that'll help people. So I was thinking teacher, doctor. And I did some volunteer work in undergrad and really got excited about the opportunity to help people through healthcare. Saw, little babies, people suffering. So I did get into medical school. And then the next step was, what kind of doctor you want to be? And at that time, this is in the mid-'80s, I knew there was one thing I did not want to do, and that was surgery. At that time, surgery was a pretty malignant specialty. A lot of you had to be tough and get screamed at and yelled at. So I put my surgery rotation last. But then when I did it, I think a lot of surgeons actually start out in medical school as the most tender-hearted medical students. Because when you see somebody suffering and then you actively introduce something like a surgical procedure and you see the suffering relieved, that's a pretty good feeling. And so, I was kind of didn't know what to do at that point because I was not planning on surgery. I interviewed about 25 places. I found about 4 places I thought had a decent environment, and fortunately matched at one in Atlanta, Georgia, called Georgia Baptist. So that started my surgical career. And I know we'll talk some more about me and my journey through this dialogue. So that's kind of the beginning of my career getting started in surgery.
Absolutely. David, I have a fun question for you that I didn't tell you I wanted to ask you, but I'd like to ask you now.
Love surprises.
Set things down here. I feel like people that are connected to the innovation and entrepreneurship and investment community, you don't just flip a switch one day and become scrappy, right? You either did something young, whether they were, in high school or college, to make money or build business or get exposure. I'm curious, outside of med tech and investment analysts, what did you do? What was the first thing you did to make money?
That was scrappy, or I've had a pretty sort of diverse career, and it started quite officially quite boringly after university. My first job was in investment banking, working for a little-known Australian bank called Macquarie. But actually, I remember now at university, first money I made was working in a retail shop in Sydney, but the first interesting money I made was brokering some deals around art back at university in London, where people would say, I want to sell this painting, and somehow we ended up finding a buyer for things, and there was art, there were a couple of other little bits and pieces, but it was sort of through brokerage that I guess I learned a bit of the hustle's probably a dirty word, but learned that passion for doing deals.
Mm-hmm. I like it. And you're still kind of brokering art deals, I suppose. Some would call surgery in art. So
beautiful.
Like, that would have been a good joke to laugh at, by the way. Make me feel good. But
Yeah.
good. So let's talk about Caresyntax. Obviously, a long journey to this point. We're going to get into the financing, but I'd like to set the foundation first. Back to you, David, with explaining what the problem is that Caresyntax is tackling and why now is the time to tackle it.
Sure, thank you very much. And Bruce, I'd also welcome you to jump in a minute as well, because
Sure.
you're intimately way more acquainted with the problem than I am. But we all know that surgery today, in spite of all of the amazing technologies that we see at these fantastic events like LSI being gradually implemented, that surgery is still incredibly dangerous. The spend in the operating room and in surgery is $1.7 trillion across the US and the EU annually, but there's up to a 15% risk of complications, 50% of liability insurance underwriting is related to surgery, 60% of insurance spend occurs as a result of perioperative actions. So we've got a system that is basically huge spend, still very dangerous, and kind of actually very inefficient. Yeah. So that's the problem. Bruce, do you want to add anything there?
Yeah, and surgery is part of healthcare. Mm-hmm. And when we look at healthcare and surgery, as you mentioned, surgery is a major part of healthcare, especially acute care. When you go back 20 plus years, and the Institute of Medicine in the United States wrote a couple of books, To Err is Human and Crossing the Quality Chasm, and in it, they described the unintentional harm that happens in healthcare, and they were focused on the US, but it's the same across the globe. Mm-hmm. We have a ridiculous amount of people who have complications and death related to healthcare and surgical procedures. And that's just tragic. And we really haven't moved the needle on that. In the United States, an additional problem is the financial suffering. Healthcare and healthcare-related costs contribute as the number one factor to personal bankruptcy in the US. I know that's not the same everywhere else, but I know privatization is happening in many countries around the world. So, that problem of unsustainable harm and unsustainable financial situations, both at the system level and at the individual patient level, is just, it's a tragedy, and we need to address it.
Yeah. In terms of things that we've talked about that need to be addressed in this space, one of the things that I've heard you reference is the siloing or inability to access data that is in the OR, both collecting and then getting that data out of the OR. Can you talk about why that's such a challenge to do and why it's such a tremendous need to address?
Yeah. So one of the things I did in my career when I started to get recruited into leadership positions was start to study healthcare, study business, study leadership. And it didn't take long, but I began to realize and understand that our global healthcare system was not sustainable. And that was overwhelming feeling. This is 20 years ago. My first leadership position was Chief of General Surgery at University of Missouri. And that was overwhelming. But I kept studying. And the foundational reason is we're founded on a science called reductionism. And in a reductionist science model, it leads to fragmentation. And just like you said, we have all these silos, so many fragments. When I began to learn the data science principles, and we work with a team of data scientists and engineers for almost 15 years, and I learned a lot about applying data science principles. One of the first principles of data science, you have to put data in context of whole definable process. And so when you have all these fragments, and the data is not available for the whole patient process, it makes it totally inefficient and impossible to measure and improve outcomes that matter. And we learn most important outcome to measure and improve is value of care. And so I kind of think that the way our current healthcare system is, we have data that ends up in data jails in every little fragment of healthcare, and we need to free up that data, put it in context, and there's several other data science principles, but that's one of the core foundational problems is the fragmentation because of how we're founded and the system structure we're functioning in today in healthcare.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's shift over and talk about the financing a little bit. Obviously, we've seen the headlines, $180 million financing that you put together, both an equity and a debt component.
Yep.
David, before we get into the financing dynamics of this round itself, I want to kind of open the mind of an investor for everyone here who is raising capital and thinking about engaging with those like yourselves. Can you tell me a little bit about when you first got exposed to Caresyntax, and then walk me through the timeline from that first exposure, the building of the relationship, and then when the deal gets done, and what your involvement was like at those nodes on the line?
Yeah, certainly. So Caresyntax I've actually known peripherally for many, many years. And I've actually known the CEO and CFO, especially the CFO and co-founder Björn von Siemens, I've known for 15 years, kind of peripherally related to Caresyntax. So I've watched them evolve for a long time, and like many startups, there are fits and starts and twists and turns and near-death experiences along the way. This is all part of the game. But it was really 2 years ago that I decided to formalize the relationship with Caresyntax and take a bigger bet on them. And the reason for that was I felt like they'd finally got the ingredients right. They were on the right track before then, and every investor decides, what the right point is to enter. But I started to see revenues growing at the right pace and getting to the right size. I started to see the traction the business was getting outside of one or two key markets. And more generally, when we look at companies, I like to build a relationship with the business for a period of time. This is not a case of listening to a good pitch and thinking this is fantastic. Let's invest. I think generally it can take a year, 18 months before we decide to push the button on an investment. And in the case of Caresyntax, it actually it took a lot longer. But I was lucky because I knew the guys, and so I had I think a unique sort of insider perspective on how the business was being run. But I would emphasise to people with earlier stage businesses that when you're thinking about fundraising, that you really focus on building these long-term relationships, and you recognise that actually a lot of patience is required. It's going to take you maybe a year, 18 months to bring the funds in, and to have your eye on the next raise as well, because for the next raise, you might need there'll be a different set of investors that'll be interesting to your business. And so you need to be building those relationships with them earlier on as well. And actually from a fundraising perspective, this is what I think Caresyntax does incredibly well, is talking to lots of people and building lots of fantastic relationships across across that sort of stage spectrum, so that when it's the right time, people are not only aware of who Caresyntax are and what they're doing, but also already have an existing relationship with them.
Mm-hmm. Setting the stage for the financing, kind of on the other side of the equation, Bruce, you obviously brought a lot to this financing round with the clinical expertise, but your previous company as well, having exited and now bringing that expertise to Caresyntax at the journey, or on the stage of the journey that it was at. Can you talk a little bit about some of the key learnings from the previous venture and how you leverage those in supporting and leading Caresyntax?
Yeah, and it really has to do with the aligned mission and vision around improving patient outcomes. And that was obviously what attracted me to join Caresyntax. Go back 10 years, I mentioned, we brought in a team of data scientists, we brought in engineers. We were just learning that data science principles really needed to be introduced into healthcare, but we didn't know how to do it. We hadn't done it before. Obviously, an analogy that everybody knows is Moneyball in baseball, 20 years ago. Before that, baseball used the same box score, the same exact data for every team all the time, always the same. And that's kind of what we do in healthcare. We do the same in the United States. We have quality measures. We've introduced quality measures 20 years ago. We've not improved quality at all. It's understanding data science that we need to go through. And so for our own hernia program, we did that for years. And we learned the science is all about measurement and improvement. If you can measure something, use data tools appropriately, you can improve what you measure. And it took us a while, but like I mentioned, we understood if we're going to have a sustainable healthcare system, we need to learn how to measure the value of care, putting financial data with outcomes data in the context of whole definable process. So as we did that and as we learned that, we were able to lower costs, improve outcomes significantly. A byproduct is the hospital had better financial outcomes. But we realized there was a business model in that. If we could measure the value of care for any patient process, we could also measure the value of any drug, device, or diagnostics tool in that process. So our business model became partnering with industry. They pay us, we go into the clinical environment and apply our value-based CQI method, which is a quality improvement method. So in the US, it doesn't require human subject research barriers like IRB and other things that are in place appropriately for clinical trials, but this is quality improvement. So we're measuring and we're improving outcomes in real-world patient care settings, not randomizing. We let the clinician do what they do, but then we measure, we collect that data and see what the impact of a drug, device, or diagnostic tool is on those value-based outcomes. And we did that for about a decade. I was still, as a surgeon, in a leadership position. My last leadership position was chair of surgery at University of Tennessee in Knoxville, but I couldn't get the hospitals to buy in. And so finally I realized if we're going to get this spread into healthcare, I'm going to have to leave surgery and finally kind of jump all in and be CEO of the data analytics company that we started. So that was 2019. And really learned a lot. Being a CEO is very different than being a surgeon. I was used to teaching everybody. And as a CEO, you got to listen and learn and ask questions. And so, that was a lot of learning. But as I met Caresyntax, I realized, this parallel path that they were on and our team was on had the same mission and vision. Obviously, they'd done much better at raising money than we had, but I think we had a key component of the Caresyntax platform around the data science principles. So it was a natural match. And as you mentioned, a year ago yesterday, the acquisition went through, and so here we are.
Yeah. I want to come back around to, David, something you were talking about with respect to watching the company grow over time. When the company was in its infancy and you were seeing it and tracking it, it was likely functioning very different and had a very different set of strategic goals and mandates. Now, fast forward, you put in an investment along that journey. 2 years later, this round comes together, bringing in new investors to that syndicate with their own different expectations for the company, goals, and mandates. What's it like managing, the syndicate as it grows, and how do you and the other leadership at the company, from both a financial and operational perspective, think about, adding new voices to that conversation and making sure that incentives and needs are aligned across both boards, investor syndicates, and leadership?
Yeah, there's sort of a lot to unpick in that question. Obviously, if you're a founder, you want your investors to be able to help you to grow your business and to help you raise money, to help you operationally secure new customers, and to not be obstructive in any way towards you achieving your vision. And of course, in reality, that's not the way the world works. Different venture capital funds have their own investment requirements and mandates that demand them to have certain expectations from their portfolio companies. Of course, when you get into the private equity world, you're dealing with bigger teams, so more analysis, more paperwork, oftentimes more aggressive when it comes to negotiating future rounds, valuations, when it comes to also strategy, wanting to drive your business's strategy. So as it pertains to Caresyntax, it hasn't always been easy. There have been disagreements with some of the shareholders at times. There have been some perhaps aggressive valuation negotiations with one or two of the larger shareholders, without naming names. But I think that that's part of the journey and the struggle for a founder to figure out how to manage through that process. And it kind of separates the wheat from the chaff, because you need to have incredible grit and determination and belief in your vision. And it's a certain personality type that we actually look for in founders. And talk to most VC investors, and they'll tell you the most important thing is the founder and the founder team and the personality type. And so I think when it comes to navigating through these complex investor conversations, you need to have a hell of a lot of self-belief. Is probably the most important thing. Beyond that, of course, expectations of businesses change as they go from seed to A to B to C and through the life cycle. And there is the expectation that you're driven and enthusiastic and broadly reach milestones in the earlier stages, but you don't necessarily need to be super organized and when it comes to preparing your financials or paperwork, I think there's a fair bit of forgiveness in the earlier stages, and as you get towards the later stages, it becomes far more of a financial play. And for founders who are more on the technical side, it helps to either be more financially literate or to have someone on your team who's very financially literate, who can help navigate all of these complex and at times challenging financial conversations with your investors. And certainly in the case of Caresyntax, the two co-founders are very adept at the financial stuff as well as the technical. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Bruce, representing the leadership team, any comments on that idea of transitioning the business as goals and new voices, transition how you work with the founders and evolve that vision?
Yeah, and I think a lot of what David said reiterate, but it really is staying locked on to the mission vision and being able to pivot in other areas, because it's a pretty big mission vision to transform healthcare to a value model and improve patient outcomes sustainably, but it's real. And because it's real, you have to be open to pivots and collaborations. I think the mindset was so aligned with what we were trying to do with my company, very small company, but the same kind of commitment to the long-term vision mission. And I think that's really critical. It's easy to get off track. The first company I ever started was a medical education company. And we really, it was laparoscopic surgery. So I got very fortunate. My residency was where the most laparoscopic surgeries were done at one hospital anywhere in the world in 1990. And so we were a leader in the world in laparoscopic surgery. I was teaching all around the world, but we saw the need for surgeons to get a a product that would help them see how, whatever laparoscopic procedure, they would see all the anomalies, all the complications in one thing. And we put it on a CD-ROM because a floppy disk couldn't hold all the information, but nobody had CD-ROM players yet, and that was part of the problem. But we were going public. We had an investment banking company, and they told us if you could acquire the rights to the domain .md, we would value at $500 million, and .md can be the whole platform. Well, .md is the domain for Moldova, and they had licensed .md to a company in Florida. We negotiated with them, acquired it for $10 million about a month before the .com crash. And, we got off track. We wanted to help teach and have surgeons learn how to do complex, new, minimally invasive procedures, and we got more focused on the $500 million valuation if we could acquire that .md. Yeah. And so I think that was a lesson for me. And I think, keeping on that mission vision, being able to pivot, but don't get off track of that mission vision is really critical.
And speaking of .md, of course, we have a very similar version of that today with .ai. And, we're now in the investment universe starting to see a real shakedown of companies where the ones that are real and that are able to demonstrate a business model off the back of their data, as opposed to the ones that are literally just putting .ai on their URL, it is starting to become clearer. And when we look at data-driven businesses, there are a couple of things that we look for. And one of them is that ideally we look for companies that have been doing this for more than 6 to 12 months since people got very, very excited about it in this very sort of late cycle behavior. In the case of Caresyntax, this is their business model, and it's something that they've been plugging away at for over 10 years, and it's been Bruce's passion for a long time, a very long time as well. So that's really important to us. And then also when you lift the hood of a data, an allegedly data-driven business, you want to look at the kind of data they're collecting, but you want to look at how they understand data. How are they collecting it? How are they making sense of it? And then what kind of insights are they actually generating from that data? And then are those insights worth a business model? Do they make sense, and do they create a sustainable business model? So in the case of Caresyntax, we can see that actually the data insights that the business have been able to derive are super interesting. And I wouldn't use the term that the business is just at the beginning, because it's a sustainable business today, but actually to consider the future and all the amazing insights that are going to be able to be derived as more algorithms are added to the platform. It's quite astonishing. But just to take a step back and look at the kind of insights that the business or change that the business has been able to drive and derive today, we're talking about things like a 33% reduction in the length of hospital stays. We're talking about a 54% reduction in opioid usage. We're talking about a 93% improvement on on-time starts. And this is just a few examples off the top of my head. $15,000 improvement in margin per case in one situation. So these are very, very tangible benefits for a hospital. And when you add all this up, the kind of change that this can bring about for the healthcare system overall is inspiring.
Mm. I want to talk a little bit about kind of the round itself and where you're going next before we close and ask the audience. I invite them to ask any questions.
Certainly.
When you think about the round itself and how this came together, I know there's obviously, again, there's the equity component, the debt component. Can you share a little bit about the dynamics of the round, anything that maybe beyond the headline, the big number, that we should understand as we think about the strategy you're using to grow this business and take this to the next generation?
Maybe I'll talk very briefly because I've been speaking quite a bit, and then maybe Bruce can come at it from a business perspective as well. So just to very quickly summarise what some of you may already know, but 180 million round, 80 million equity, 100 million debt facility. Out of the 100 million debt facility, which was provided by Symbiotic Capital, about 40 million has been used to refinance existing debt. 15 million is payable on certain equity and revenue targets being met. Should receive about 10 million before the end of the year. And then the remaining 45 million, and I hope I've got my mathematics right, the remaining 45 million is basically a mutual agreement between the parties on M&A transactions. And Caresyntax is often thinking about, what do we buy, what do we bury, not bury, what do we borrow? Nothing to bury. Gosh, not sure what I was thinking of in my subconscious there. But what do we borrow? And so there's tremendous opportunities to partner with these sort of point solutions that can benefit from the Caresyntax platform. But there's amazing opportunities to acquire really interesting companies that either provide tech that can be a great add-on, or that can add customers quickly to the business. And when I talk about adding customers, when I first heard this term from Caresyntax, I thought, why do you need to buy customers? It's actually because Caresyntax have been really, really good at increasing their revenues per account, per customer. So it's really about getting the foot in the door in an ecosystem which is very hard to penetrate. And once you've got a wedge product, being able to sort of land and expand. And so plenty of interesting M&A opportunities. And this is for the Series C for extension with this funding, and then the Series D round will be say 150 to 200 million round, also for to execute on an M&A strategy.
Bruce, I want to throw you a slightly adapted or a continued version of the question. So you heard David talk about the prospect of Caresyntax doing M&A to ramp up its own customer base, expand its technology stack and offerings. But let's also look at Caresyntax being on the receiving end potentially of M&A, not on the acquirer angle. Obviously, a lot of capital raised, a long journey both to date and journey ahead, but tell me how you're thinking about the future of the company with respect to where we go, where you go as a business overall. This is a vendor agnostic platform currently. Does it one day become a proprietary asset of a company much larger than Caresyntax? Is this company destined to be standalone vendor agnostic forever, and there's a different path to both impact that you want to see and financial returns for your investors?
Yeah, our vision is to have a data and analytics platform available for all of healthcare, anywhere in the world. That's what we need. We can teach data science to clinicians. We want to see a day where the clinician, every patient they see, they have a data and analytics platform that can show them what's the best value treatment for this patient with their situation, with the factors that put them in a certain subpopulation, because we can't have that one-size-fits-all mentality. So to have that, and we also want to bring the stakeholders in healthcare around that value and that data platform. So that's why we've added the business with industry, bringing startup companies as well as major top 5 medtech companies to the data, the right way to measure and improve value of their products, and even payers, bring them in and help them be part of the improvement of value, not just controlling the dollar like it has been in the private sector for other countries and a dominant part of the US. So we really want to continue that to be vendor agnostic, data agnostic, and have that be the platform for the future of healthcare. Most of what we have in healthcare, again, is the electronic medical record that's built into the fragments of healthcare, and primarily for documentation, for coding and billing. That doesn't help patients improve outcomes.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both so much. David, I'm going to start with you for some brief closing thoughts and then come around the horn here, and we'll open it up for a question or two at a time.
Thanks very much. I reflect on the journey that I've been on with Caresyntax, and just sort of segueing from what Bruce is saying, and what I find not only a compelling investment case around this concept of data-driven surgery and vendor neutrality. It's not just the investment case, but it's a vision for a sustainable healthcare system. And when we look at what that means, it's about bringing about the best technologies and knowing what impact those technologies are having in the operating room, and optimally using those technologies, the devices and tools, in a way which leads to the best outcomes for patients, and also optimal outcomes for all the other stakeholders as well. Maybe not all, but most other stakeholders. And that is the healthcare system that we dream of, and that we're excited to be, on the journey heading towards. It's been inspirational to work with the two founders of Caresyntax. I believe that as they've continued to inspire people in the ecosystem, in terms of the investor landscape, and of course the sort of complicated stakeholder landscape and hospital payer ecosystem, I believe that if anyone can achieve what they're setting out to achieve, it's the team at Caresyntax.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bruce? Yeah, I guess in closing, I think we're at a critical place in our world, in our healthcare system globally. We really need not just incremental improvement, but transformation and disruptive innovation. I think my time early in my career working with minimally invasive surgery, I got to see disruption in surgery, true disruption, because there was only open surgery before that. And I saw the pioneers of laparoscopic surgery get tomatoes thrown at them, telling people they're killing people and unethical. But ultimately, they did this because it was what was right for patients. Smaller incisions, quicker recovery, less pain. So eventually, minimally invasive surgery is obviously a major part of surgery today. This is an even bigger disruption. How we do healthcare, how we take care of patients, the fragmentation, the data jails. We need a transformation, a disruptive innovation around data. And I think to me, the data science, part of the data science that makes me most excited is the fact that we all need each other. Today in healthcare, we're aggregating data and producing algorithms. Aggregated data produces averages. Nobody's average. These algorithms are unintentionally harming people, especially marginalized subpopulations. And so to understand the science of data and systems and be able to decentralize data in each local environment globally and generate algorithms that can be networked give us the opportunity for the best predictive algorithms. And when we do that, we will have a sustainable healthcare system where costs go down and outcomes get better forever.
Well, thank you both so much. Congratulations again on the success both to date and the success you're set up for the future. And thank you everyone for joining us at LSI Europe 24. This is our last panel of the week. Round of applause for our speakers and for all of our speakers this week. And if you'd like to ask questions once we take the stage off, we'll be happy to stay and answer some questions. Thank you.